We have to keep moving. Now!
I can't. The heat is too much.
Let her rest, man.
You know what's wild? Most of the time, the single moment that completely changes your life doesn't feel like a big deal when it's happening. It feels like nothing. It feels like a Tuesday. It feels like you're just doing what any decent human being would do. And then years later, you look back and realize that one quiet second, that one small choice nobody was even watching, that was the moment everything shifted. This is a story about one of those moments. It starts on a construction site. Loud, dusty, brutal kind of work where the sun doesn't take days off, and neither do the machines. It starts with a man named Say, and before you think you know where this is going, let me tell you right now, you don't. Because this story doesn't go where most stories go. This one goes somewhere deeper. Sai was not the kind of man who walked into a room and made people turn their heads. Life had not set him up that way. He was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet that comes from inner wisdom, but the tired kind that comes from carrying too much for too long. His reflective vest didn't reflect anything anymore. His helmet had scratches running across it like old scars that never quite healed. His boots had met more stones than he could count. Every single morning, before the sun had even finished waking up, Say was already on his feet, walking a long road to the site, ready to do the same thing he did yesterday, and the day before. That carry, lift, mix, shovel, clear, repeat. If you asked Say what he wanted from life, he wouldn't give you some poetic answer. He'd tell you what hunger had taught him to want. He wanted peace. He wanted his mother to be able to rest without coughing through the night. He wanted his younger sister Bukola to go back to school, because she was 17 and sharp as a blade and her education had been interrupted, not because she wasn't smart enough, but because school fees don't care how bright you are. He wanted a roof that didn't leak. He wanted a mind that didn't wake up at 3 in the morning terrified about tomorrow. Simple things. Honest things. The kind of things that feel small until you don't have them. His foreman was a man named Alhaji Soul. The kind of man who measured his own power by how quietly the people under him stayed. He liked workers who didn't talk too much, didn't push back on overtime, didn't ask why their pay was 3 weeks late, didn't make noise about safety violations. Alhaji used to say, Say was a good worker. What he meant was, Say was convenient. And there is a massive difference between those two things that men like Alhaji never bother to learn. But Say's silence wasn't the silence of someone at peace. It was the silence of someone running on empty. He was tired of promises that dissolved like sugar in rain. Tired of supervisors who spoke like kings but paid like thieves. Tired of watching the company trucks roll around full of fuel while the workers drank sachet water and hoped it would be enough to get them through the heat. He did the work because he needed to. He kept his head down because he had to. But inside, something was always burning low, not rage, not bitterness, just a quiet question that never got answered. Is this all there is? Now, the morning, everything changed. The air was dry and heavy. Dust was rising off the site like smoke signals nobody was reading. A grader was roaring. An excavator was swinging its massive arm around like it owned the hole. Earth workers were shouting over the noise, voices sharp and impatient. Saya was moving bags of cement with 2 other guys when he saw her. And at first, honestly, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Because who walks onto a construction site like that? She was pregnant, visibly, significantly pregnant. Moving carefully along the edge of the site, like every single step was a negotiation with her own body. Her clothes were not the kind you'd see on a woman selling food by the roadside. And she wasn't someone who'd wandered in off the street. She wore a simple long-sleeved shirt tucked into loose trousers. A reflective vest was draped over one shoulder, like she'd put it on in a hurry and never quite finished. Her safety boots looked almost too new for all this dust. Her hair was packed neatly, not trying to impress anyone, just handled. And in one hand she carried a rolled-up blueprint. In the other, a small water bottle. But as she walked, her free hand kept drifting to her belly. Not in a dramatic way. In the way you touch something precious without even realizing you're doing it. SEI slowed down. The cement bag on his shoulder didn't get any heavier. But it suddenly felt that way because his mind had stopped moving in one direction and started moving in another. He watched her carefully. She looked left, she looked right. She paused, and then her body just kind of decided it was done, pretending to be fine. She leaned against a stack of concrete blocks and her knees bent slightly, and her face had that particular expression on it that Say recognized immediately. Not from a woman in safety boots. From his mother. When his mother tried to act like she wasn't sick so her kids wouldn't worry. That expression. That specific exhausted bravery. The other workers around Say had their own reactions. One of them laughed and said, "Is this place a maternity ward?" Another shook his head slowly and said something about women bringing trouble onto a site. They weren't cruel men, exactly. Just men who had learned to keep their heads down and mind their business, because that was how you survived in a place like that. SEI said nothing. But his eyes stayed on her. Before he could even finish deciding what to do, Al-Haji Sol's voice cracked through the noise like a whip. "Say, why are you standing there like a statue? The cement isn't going to carry itself." SEI snapped back, answered quickly, went back to work. But even with his hands moving, and his back bending, and the foreman's eyes on him, his mind was still over there by the concrete blocks, watching a woman try to hold herself together in a place that wasn't built for anything as human as what she was going through. When he came back for his next load, Chad slid lower. Not all the way to the ground, just low enough to take some of the pressure off her legs. Her hands were trembling slightly as she tried to take a sip from her water bottle. Her breathing was shallow. Around her, workers glanced and looked away. She was not their problem. That was the silent agreement. Then Al-Haji Sol walked over. Big-bellied, confident, frowning. He called out to her like she was a child who'd wandered somewhere she shouldn't be, told her this place was dangerous. Told her she should go home, told her they were working and didn't need this kind of situation. The woman looked up slowly. Her eyes were tired, but they had something behind them, a sharpness, a steadiness, the look of someone who has been underestimated so many times, it stopped surprising her. She said she was there for an inspection. Al-Haji laughed it off. Even as she pushed back, her voice had that stretched quality, like strength that's been used almost all the way up, and then she tried to stand. She pushed herself off the concrete blocks, got herself upright, took one step, and swayed. Just slightly. Just enough. SEI dropped the empty sack he was holding and moved. One of the workers next to him hissed, "Leave it. It's not your business." But Say was already there. And here's the thing about how he did it. He didn't swoop in dramatically. He didn't grab her, or make a scene, or perform his helpfulness for an audience. He just stepped close enough to matter and gave her the choice. He said, quietly, "There's shade over there. Come sit down." She looked at him. And something passed between them in that moment, not anything romantic, not anything complicated. Just two human beings recognizing each other. One person seeing another person as a person, not a problem, not a liability, not an inconvenience. Just a person. He guided her slowly to the small temporary shed where there was a wooden bench. He found a clean, empty cement bag and laid it across the bench like a cover. He offered her half of his own water, warm from the heat, not much, but real. She hesitated, then took it, and said thank you in a voice that meant it. CI looked around and spotted the cooler box belonging to the woman who sold food at the edge of the road every morning. He walked over and asked her for cold water. The vendor raised her eyebrows. Cold water? For who? He said, for a pregnant woman. And the vendor's whole face changed immediately. The way people's faces change when something cuts through all the noise and reaches what's actually human in them. She reached into the cooler, pulled out 2 chilled sachets, and said, "Take it. God will remember you, .sc. I brought them back." The woman pressed one against her forehead and drank the other slowly. Her breathing evened out. The machines were still thundering in the background, but there in the shed it was quieter. And after a moment, she opened her eyes and asked his name. "Say," he told her. She said hers. "Engineer Amica, project engineer." SEI blinked. He looked at the blueprint in her hand, at those slightly too new boots, at the way she carried herself even while exhausted, and it all suddenly made sense. She wasn't wandering. She wasn't lost. She was doing her job in conditions that were quietly trying to break her. And she had kept going anyway. They talked for a little while. She told him her driver was stuck behind a broken-down truck on the road, that she'd decided to walk the last stretch because she didn't want to delay the inspection, that her legs had other ideas. He told her simply that she shouldn't have been out here alone in this condition. She told him, just as simply, that work doesn't pause because a woman is pregnant. He understood that. Poverty didn't pause because a man was tired either. Then, Alhaji Sal came back, like a storm that couldn't let anything be. He barked at Say, "Are you being paid to sit down? Who's doing the work?" He waved his hand and told Say to leave the engineer to her own people to handle. Engineer Amaka's voice changed when she heard that, cool, sharp, like a blade being turned in the light. She told Alhaji directly, she wasn't some stray woman to be managed. She was the supervising engineer on this project. And you could see the exact moment Alhaji understood what that meant. Not because he suddenly respected her, but because he suddenly feared what her title could do to his future. He stumbled through an apology. Amaka didn't accept it graciously. She told him the biggest problem on any construction site isn't a pregnant woman resting in the shade. It's a foreman who thinks human beings are tools. The silence that followed had weight. She asked for the site's first aid kit. She asked for the safety officer. She handled herself with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. She wasn't playing a role. She knew her work. She checked her own blood pressure. She breathed, steadied herself, and made it clear she wasn't leaving until the inspection was done. Not long after, the company's senior site manager arrived in a clean white pickup, a man named Mr. Daru who wore a hard hat that had never touched dust. He came in looking concerned, but managed, somehow, to also look annoyed at the same time, which is a special talent that certain kinds of managers develop. He thanked Say for helping with a nod that carried no actual warmth in it. He told him that next time, he should follow protocol and not interfere with site operations. Panchia C lowered his head and said, "Yes sir, Mr. Duru." Then turned to Amaka and basically tried to manage her out of the situation, talking about liability, about the company's risk, about her condition already affecting productivity. And the way he said it, all smooth and reasonable, on the surface, was the kind of talk that sounds like concern but is actually just control with better vocabulary. Amaka's jaw tightened. She looked at him and said one word, liability, and then, quietly, she asked if that was honestly all he saw. She told him that pressure is not an excuse for cruelty. She told him she knew what real pressure felt like. When she finally agreed to leave, she was helped to the vehicle by the safety officer. Say stayed back, and just before she got in, she turned and found his eyes. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "God be with you, engineer." The pickup drove away. The machines kept going. Pangaea stood there with the odd feeling that something had just happened that he didn't have the language for yet. He found out fast enough what it was going to cost him. That same afternoon, Al-Haji assigned him to the far end of the site. The hottest, most exposed section, to clear debris alone, under direct sun, with no shade and no break. When Say asked for a few minutes to rest, Al-Haji laughed and said, "Kindness worker, you want a break? Go find another engineer to help. SEI." Swallowed it. He worked because he had to. His mother needed medication. His sister needed school fees. His family needed him to be employed, even in a job that punished him for being decent. But inside, the quiet question was louder now. Why did doing good always come with punishment? 2 days later, his mother got worse. The cough that had been manageable was deeper now, more painful. The small local clinic wanted money before they'd even look at her. Say counted what he had. It wasn't close. He thought about borrowing from neighbors, but their situations weren't different enough to make that realistic. He thought about asking Al-Haji for a pay advance and immediately rejected the idea, because he knew exactly what kind of leverage that would hand the man. That night, he sat outside their room in the compound, and his little sister Bukola sat beside Kim's 17 years old, sharp mind, interrupted future. She asked him quietly if their mother was going to die. His throat tightened. He told her no. He told her God wouldn't allow it. She looked down and said she sometimes wished they were rich. He didn't scold her for it. He understood it. Poverty has this specific way of turning your dreams into exhausted prayers. The next morning he went to the site. Feeling like a man moving through wet concrete, mixed real concrete, like someone doing it in a bad dream. Lifted rods that felt heavier than their actual weight. Al-Haji shouted at him for being slow. Mr. Duru walked past and looked at him like he was a problem. That hadn't been solved yet, then. Around midday, a black SUV pulled onto the site. Clean, tinted, moving with the particular confidence of a vehicle that belongs somewhere important. The whole atmosphere on the site shifted when it arrived. Workers stood slightly straighter. Foremen adjusted their helmets. Even Mr. Duru's voice got softer when he went to meet it. 2 men in suits stepped out. Then a woman, no safety boots. This time, a simple loose dress, a light scarf, her hair neat. Her face looked rested compared to before. But her eyes were exactly the same. Steady, sharp, human. Engineer. She walked across the site slowly but with absolute purpose. And her eyes found Sai standing by a gravel pile holding a shovel like he'd forgotten what to do with it. Their eyes met. She walked straight toward him, ignoring Mr. Duru's anxious footsteps behind her. She stopped in front of Sai and said, "You?" He nodded, unsure what was happening. She asked him directly, "How have they treated you since that day?" He hesitated. In a place like that, the truth is a luxury most people can't afford. But something in her eyes told him it was safer to be honest with her than to be polite. He told her. "They punished me." Said I distracted the sight. Amaka turned slowly to face Mr. Duru and Al-Haji Saul, who were standing nearby trying to look casual and failing completely. Her voice was measured. She repeated what Say had said. Punished him for offering a pregnant woman water and shade. Mr. Daru tried the smile. Said something about sight discipline. El-Haji tried to start a sentence. El-Haji's eyes cut him off before the first word was out. She told him not to explain, just listen. Then she turned back to Say and asked for his full name. His position. What he did on sight. She filed every answer quietly away. And then she said 3 words that made Say's stomach drop. Come with me. He blinked. She said it again. Now, Mr. Daru tried to object that Say couldn't just leave his post. Amaka said he would leave. That if there was an issue, they could address it at the office. She said it the way someone says something when they already know how the rest of the conversation ends. The site went quiet in a strange way. Not because the machine stopped, but because the humans did. Workers stared. Some with envy, some with suspicion.
Al-Haji's face
was the face of a man being asked to swallow something he couldn't chew. Say's legs felt unsteady. But he followed. They walked to the SUV. A man opened the door for Amaka. Say stood on the outside of it. Not sure if he was supposed to get in, or just stand there feeling like a man who'd accidentally walked onto the wrong set. Amaka looked at him. Get in. He sat on the edge of the seat like someone afraid the leather might reject him. His dusty clothes were out of place in a very specific way. The kind of out of place that makes you hyper-aware of every inch of yourself. The car smelled like clean air and quiet money. His palms were sweating. Amaka sat beside him, not close, not distant. She spoke gently. She told him she wasn't there to embarrass him. She was there because kindness must not be punished. He said he'd only helped because she was human. She said that was exactly enough. The car moved. Say watched through the tinted windows as the dusty site disappeared behind them, and the city opened up into wider streets, taller buildings, smoother roads. Parts of the city he had walked past but never entered. The SUV moved through gates, past clean uniformed security men, and stopped in front of a building that stood like it had been constructed with the intention of making certain kinds of people feel small, and others feel certain. Inside was cold from the air conditioning, and buzzing with a particular energy of a place where decisions get made. People walked with laptops and files, and the unhurried speed of people who know where they're going. A receptionist stood up immediately when she saw Amaka, and greeted her like you greet someone whose time you respect. Say's eyes took in everything. Like a man in a museum he'd never been invited to before. They took an elevator. Say's ears popped slightly. The doors opened onto a floor lined with framed photographs, bridges, roads, buildings. A sign on the wall read, Mu Infrastructure Group, Project Oversight Division, and Say's heart stopped, and then restarted. He knew that name. This was not some small office. This was the company running major projects across the state. This was the parent company of the firm that employed Al-Haji Saul and Mr. Daru. These were not the middlemen. These were the people the middlemen answered to. In Amaka's office, bright, organized, filled with engineering drawings and models and framed certificates, she told him to sit. He sat carefully, like a man who hadn't yet been given permission to take up space. She sat across from him and simply said, Tell me about yourself. He didn't perform it. He didn't dress it up. He just told the truth. His mother's illness, Bukola's interrupted school, the long walks to work before dawn. The delayed wages, Al-Hajj's daily insults. The workers who got hurt and were sent home with nothing. The materials that didn't match the designs, the foreman who collected envelopes. He spoke plainly, the way you speak when you've stopped hoping to be believed and decided to just be honest anyway. When he finished, Amaka's eyes were wet. She didn't cry. But she held herself the way a bridge holds weight, not without feeling it. just without breaking under it. She told him something then. She said that 2 days before coming to the site, she'd been in the hospital. Her blood pressure had been rising dangerously. Her baby was at risk. And the reason, she said, was not just the heat and the long days and the pregnancy. The reason was that someone was trying to destroy her. She told him about the people who wanted her removed. Not because she was bad at her job, because she was too good at it. She'd refused to sign off on substandard work. Refused to approve inflated invoices. Refused to let greed quietly turn public roads into accidents waiting to happen. So they threatened her, followed her, sent messages warning her to fall in line or face consequences. And when she still refused, they started the other war. The slower, quieter one. They called her difficult. Said pregnancy was making her emotional. Said she was unstable and arrogant and a liability. Sat with all of that landing on him. Then he asked, carefully, why she was telling him this. Looked at him and said something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. She said that the people at the bottom see the truth first. Workers notice when materials are weak. Workers hear when foremen are being paid to look the other way. Workers see everything, but they're afraid to say what they see because they know they can be crushed. Then she said, I need someone who isn't tangled up in their greed, someone who still has a functioning conscience. Say told her he was just a laborer, that he didn't understand what he could possibly do. She told him he could do exactly what he had already done. Choose what's right, even when it costs him. She left for a meeting. He sat alone in that office with the framed photographs and the quiet hum of expensive air conditioning. He looked at those pictures of roads and bridges and thought about who actually built them. He thought about the men whose names never made it into the frame. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt like someone had actually seen him. When Amika came back, she brought him into a large conference room full of suited people with files and serious faces, the kind of people whose words could move money and end careers. She introduced him not as a prop or a symbol, but as a witness. She stood at the head of the table and said, simply and clearly, this is Say, a worker from Site OKO. 2 days ago on that site, I had a health episode. The person who helped me was not a manager, not a supervisor. It was this man. And after he helped me, he was punished for it. The room went quiet. She opened a file. She placed documents on the table, reports of delayed wages, safety violations, suspicious discrepancies. Immaterials across multiple sites. She said she believed these were being hidden by middle management. She said she would not sign off on any project phase until it was addressed. The room did not like that. Voices rose. Faces tightened. The older man with grey hair at the end of the table, calm and still, while the others shifted, looked at Say and asked if he had anything to say. This was the moment. The actual one, not a rehearsed version of it. The moment where fear and truth both put their hands up and Say had to choose which one to call on. He thought about his mother's cough. He thought about Bukola's school uniform folded up and waiting. He thought about the workers who got injured and were handed nothing. He thought about cement bags mixed wrong and iron rods too thin, and envelopes passing between hands that should have been holding safety reports instead. He spoke. Simply. Without decoration. He said he had seen blocks crumble from bad mixing. Seen rods thinner than the design called for. Seen foremen collect envelopes. Seen safety rules treated like suggestions. Seen workers handled like they were less than people. He said if you build roads with lies, the roads carry death. He said that the day engineer Marka fell ill, people cared more about blame than about her life. And he said that quietly, but it sat in that room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples going out in every direction now. What happened after was not clean or simple or fast. It never is when you start pulling at the threads of something that a lot of people spent years carefully weaving. Within a week, there were rumors. Amaka was difficult. Say was bribed. She was playing the sympathy card. He was being used. Alkaji got worse, assigned Say the hardest tasks, insulted him openly, in front of the other workers. Told people to stay away from him. Mr. Daru's eyes carried a particular kind of cold whenever they passed each other. And then one evening, on his way home, two men stopped Say on a dark stretch of road. No weapons. Just their hands and their message. They pushed him down, went through his pockets, and told him, "Tell your engineer to keep quiet, or she will regret it." He went home that night and said nothing to his family. He sat with the bruises and with the knowledge that he had been noticed. Which is sometimes the most dangerous thing a person at the bottom of a system can be. But the next morning he went to Amaka's office. He told her everything. She listened without flinching. When he finished, she nodded slowly. He asked her if maybe he should step back. He didn't want anyone dying because of him. She told him gently that this wasn't because of him. This was greed hating the light. She walked to the window, looked out at the city moving below. She told him about her father, how he had built something real, how he had refused shortcuts and bribes, how the stress of doing right in a system built. But doing wrong had taken years off his life. She turned back to Say and told him she had studied engineering to protect what her father built. That the board had appointed her chief project. Engineered because the company was hemorrhaging from the inside out. Then she said something she hadn't told him before. She said there was something he didn't know yet. He waited. She said, "Soon." Weeks passed. Investigations began. Audits were ordered. Some supervisors were suspended. Alhaji Sao went from arrogance to a quieter, more anxious version of himself. Mr. Juru started avoiding direct eye contact with almost everyone. The resistance grew to false accusations, anonymous petitions, attempts to paint Amaka as financially corrupt, emotionally unfit, a liability to the project. They used her pregnancy like a weapon, called her unstable, called her hormonal. Said she was letting personal feelings cloud professional judgment. Say watched all of it and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not fear. Not defeat. A kind of clean, clear anger, the righteous kind, that doesn't burn everything. Just lights up exactly what's wrong. Then one afternoon, early labor. Amaka was in the office when it hit her, sudden and hard. Her assistant panicked. Cars were called. Say happened to be in the building dropping off reports. He heard the commotion. He moved without thinking, not because of titles or strategy or anything calculated, just because there was a person in pain, and he was there. He found her pale, sweating, breathing through it. He stepped close and said quietly, "Breathe. Breathe. Slow." She looked at him. And in the middle of that pain and fear and everything, there was trust in her eyes. She followed his rhythm. They got her to the hospital. Hours later, the baby arrived healthy, strong cry, a girl. The doctors said God had helped. Say sat on a hospital bench and said a prayer he hadn't planned. When Amaka called for him, he walked into a room that held her mother and the older board member with the grey hair and calm eyes. He froze slightly at the man's presence. Then Amaka told him to sit. She told him the full truth then. Her father had not just built roads. He had founded the company. Mu Infrastructure Group was his creation, built from nothing, built with the belief that construction could be done with integrity and still be profitable. When he died, People came for it, men who wanted to turn it into a machine for personal enrichment. Amaka had studied engineering, not for a title, but to protect what he left. The board chair. The grey-haired man who had watched Say speak in that conference room said it plainly. Engineer Amaka is the majority shareholder. Say's breath stopped. Not the supervising engineer. Not just the chief project engineer. The owner. The person those men had been circling for months, trying to push out so they could take what was never theirs. Amaka opened a file from beside her bed and placed it in front of Sai. The subcontractor arrangement was being terminated. The workforce was being restructured. And Say would not be going back to that site as a laborer. He shook his head, overwhelmed. Unable to find words, she smiled, a real one, the tired but genuine kind. She told him she wasn't offering charity. She was offering justice. She told him she wanted him in the new safety and integrity unit they were creating. A steady salary, health coverage for his mother, support for Bukala's education. A real future built on the foundation of who he had already proven he was. His tears came quietly. He bowed his head and said thank you. She said, don't thank me like I'm saving you. Your own heart opened this door. Within months, what had been buried started rising to the surface, the way truth tends to do when someone stops letting it get covered. Al-Haji Saul was dismissed. Mr. Duru was investigated. Men who had functioned comfortably in their own untouchability found the ground shifting under them. And for the first time on those sites, workers were paid when they were supposed to be. Paid safety protocols were actually followed. Materials were tested properly. Roads were built right. Say trained. Learned to read site plans. Learned protocols. Learned how to give workers a voice without making himself the loudest person in the room. Became a bridge between the people doing the work and the people making the decisions, not by demanding, not by performing, but by listening. His mother's health stabilized. Bukala went back to school. The man who used to walk to work before dawn carrying a mountain on his back walked now with something different. Not lighter, exactly, but purposeful, grounded, like a man who finally knows why he gets up in the morning. One evening, months into all of it, Say stood on a newly finished section of road as the sun came down. Cars drove over it smooth and steady. No potholes, no weak edges, no lies packed in underneath. Amaka stood beside him, her daughter asleep against her chest. She looked at the road and then looked at him. You see, she said quietly, this is what happens when people choose right. He nodded. He thought about that first day. The dust, the noise, the other workers telling him it wasn't his business, that he should keep moving, that kindness was trouble. He thought about the cup of warm water and the shade of a temporary shed and how none of it felt like a turning point when it was happening. It just felt like what a person does. And he understood something about the world then. Something the world spends a lot of energy trying to get people to forget. The world tries to train people towards selfishness because selfishness is predictable. Selfish people are manageable. Selfish people stay in their lane. But kindness is unpredictable. Kindness doesn't stay where you put it. Kindness has this way of moving through walls and across distances and landing in places you never expected. Kindness can expose what power tries to hide. It can break systems that were built specifically to be unbreakable. It can rewrite the direction of a life, sometimes yours, sometimes someone else's, sometimes both at the same time without anyone realizing it until it's already done. The elders say it this way: the hand that offers water to the weary may be the very hand that destiny lifts when the moment of lifting comes. Don't let anyone talk you out of your own decency. Not a foreman with a loud voice. Not a system built to make you invisible. Not the very reasonable sounding logic that says mind your business and keep your head down. Your business is exactly this, being human in places that are forgotten. What that means? If this story said something to you, if it woke up something you needed to hear today, hit the like button, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and drop a comment below. Tell me which moment hit you hardest. Tell me about a time someone's small kindness changed something for you, or a time yours changed something for someone else. These stories matter. These conversations matter. Because the lessons in them are disappearing, and the only way to keep them alive is to keep passing them on. See you in the next one.